Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle, and I'm the discussion leader for GenSpace. So my background is in microbial oceanography. So I have a PhD from Columbia, and my research used to take me to the middle of the ocean. Here I am collecting samples just 100 miles north of Hawaii. Here I am in a Gumby suit, and this is the critter that I studied. It's a bacterium called Trichodesmium that forms these large blooms in the middle of the ocean in what is basically a desert out in the middle of the really low nutrient oligotrophic ocean. Since then, I've left the lab and now I'm an editor at one of the nature journals. And my passion is really reading about science and sharing the really interesting ways that microbes impact the planet. And that's what brought me to GenSpace. So this is I think our 9th or 10th Planet Microbes and our final Planet Microbes in 2020. So we've been to a lot of interesting places in Planet Microbes so far. We've been to the driest place on Earth in the Atacama Desert, and we've been to the bottom of the ocean in hydrothermal vents. And now we are going to the final frontier. We're going to space. So this is Planet Microbes, a space odyssey. And I'm thrilled that there are some people who already have experience with microbes in space and electromicrobial physiology. So you guys and anyone else, please feel free to jump in whenever you want. To the extent that we can make this a discussion, it'll be way more fun. So let's get moving. Before we get to space, we have to start with a brief chemistry lesson. And this paper is all about the rare earth elements. And those elements are the ones that are here at the bottom of the periodic table that sort of fit in right here. They're the elements that have the weird names that are hard to pronounce and that maybe you've never heard of. But they are super important. They have a lot of really unique physical chemical properties. So they are highly magnetic, really good at conductivity. Some of them have luminescent properties. And because of this, they are used in catalysis and metallurgy and electronics. And I just pulled some of these interesting facts from geology.com. But a lot of, apparently all of the scandium in the United States goes into aluminum alloy baseball bats. So one of the most precious metals is all going to baseball bats in the United States. That's kind of wild, but I guess it's our favorite pastime. And then rare earth elements can be used to make really high powered and really efficient magnets. And 2 tons of those are used in every single wind turbine that you see spinning around. So these elements are super important, have a lot of really specific and unique uses. Just pulling up the chat room. Impressive facts. Yeah, thanks, geology.com. So the question arises, though, are rare earth elements really rare? What makes these elements so valuable and special? Are they like gold, or are they actually not that rare? And it turns out that the name rare earth elements is actually a bit of a misnomer, because the 2 least abundant rare earth elements are about 200 times more abundant in Earth's crust than gold. And the most abundant, neodymium and lanthanum and yttrium, I don't think I've ever actually heard this element pronounced out loud, so someone correct me if I just pronounced that wrong. But these elements are about as abundant as zinc and nickel and lead that we use all the time and aren't anywhere near as valuable as gold. So what makes these elements rare earth elements? And that is that they are found sort of equally distributed around the Earth's crust in very low concentrations. So there's a lot of them, but it's not like a gold deposit or something that you could go and mine a big chunk of it out of. And that makes them really, really hard to mine. And it makes them very valuable because it's super difficult to concentrate those out into the concentrations that you would need to be useful. You can imagine that if you need 2 tons of some rare earth element to make a wind turbine, that takes a lot of processing, and that's sort of what makes them rare in name. And before 1965, there was actually little demand for rare earth elements. And what changed is the invention of the color TV. And so these rare earth elements were used to conduct the electricity to make the color TVs work. And since then, demand has rapidly increased. And now with smartphones and computers, you can see that since 2007, there's been just this enormous increase in the demand for rare earth elements that is correlated with our demand for cell phones and other electronics. What I think is an interesting thing to point out about this graph is that this is the number of smartphones sold each year worldwide, and you can see it sort of stagnating out in recent time. But what do we do with our old cell phones? I mean, I have all of mine in a tote bag in a closet in my apartment, and I think probably that goes for the majority of people. You're using this old phone and then you're getting rid of it, and all of the rare earth elements, even though it's a small amount, aren't getting recycled. Yeah, exactly, in a box somewhere in the house. Someone is asking, how many old cell phones do I have? I got my first cell phone when I was 13. It was a Nokia push phone, not a flip phone. And since then, I think based on what my computer remembers, I'm on my 9th phone. And some of those have been recycled, or I've given them back to Apple. But the majority, even though this looks like it's stagnating, because we're not recycling all of the old rare earth elements, that means that demand is increasing and our supply is becoming more and more limited. And the true cost of mining these rare earth elements is the damage that they do to the environment. So here's an aerial view of a mining operation. You can imagine that because the concentration of these elements is so thin in the actual Earth's crust, you have to process a lot of material to concentrate those rare earth elements. And the chemicals that they have to use and the crushing of rocks has serious tolls on the environment. Here's an image of acid mine drainage, where they're using chemicals like cyanide and other things to concentrate these rare earth elements out, and it has serious consequences for the environment. So Tina's asking if REEs, rare earth elements, can be recouped from old cell phones. In theory, they probably could, and they should be. And I'm not sure what happens to them when you return your iPhone to Apple or whomever you have an iPhone from. I'm not sure if they recycle them, but if I, an environmentalist, am any indication, probably the majority of people just also keep their old stuff in a tote bag. So I think there aren't really robust programs to recycle these rare earth elements yet. And I think one interesting thing about that is also worth keeping in mind is the trade-offs of sustainability. So wind power is touted as a great clean alternative energy source. And here, the very recognizable Toyota Prius, which has a battery that relies on rare earth elements. So what are the trade-offs of building this sustainable future? Is it really sustainable, or as sustainable as we think, if each one of these wind turbines or each Prius is relying on a resource like a rare earth element that is that could potentially have a demand that outstrips its supply? And where do we have to go to find new ones? And what are the economic or the environmental consequences of getting more and more of these elements? One alternative to the traditional mining procedures was that in a couple decades ago, it was discovered that some bacteria, through the process of their metabolism, are actually sort of doing a similar process to mining. So scientists discovered these particular bacteria that live in the soil, and as a byproduct of their metabolism, they are able to pull elements like copper out of the soil and into solution. And they figured out a way to take advantage of this process and essentially harness these microbes to concentrate elements like copper out of a solid substrate, shuttle it down to a settling chamber, and then concentrate, have a really clean, albeit slow way to concentrate those really precious elements downstream. And apparently about 10 to 20% of copper and gold is produced today with the help of bacteria. And bacteria can do the exact same thing for rare earth elements. They can concentrate it out by changing the acidity of where they're growing, or by needing to use these elements as cofactors for enzymes in their metabolism. And it's just a matter of trying to make this more efficient and economically desirable, I guess, in the future, to make this an alternative to the environmentally damaging rare earth element mining practices. And then that brings us to space. Why would scientists or economists or companies like Apple, why would they be interested in mining in space, knowing that bacteria can be used to concentrate these elements that we desire? Does anyone have any ideas about why looking to space might be sort of a tempting thing for people to do when it comes to rare earth elements? Money. Michelle says money. Exactly, yeah. Like I said, demand for these elements are soon outstripping supply. And if planets like Mars or the moon are really concentrated in an untapped well of these rare earth elements, then people could stand to make a lot of money by harvesting them there. Tina says, no environmental protection laws. That is also a great thing, or not a great thing, but something to keep in mind. There's no, to my knowledge, there is no limitation to what can be harvested or mined on different planets. The challenge would be getting mining equipment there and bringing it back, I guess. Watching Mars on Netflix. Perhaps you've just seen Mars and really want to go. Yeah, Michelle also says, get in early before laws are made or restrictions, and before land ownership occurs. These are all great things. But what I think is interesting is that if, as humans look to other planets, we are going to, at some point in time, if Elon Musk has his way, start traveling to these different places. What are we going to need there? Rare earth elements to replace your cell phones when you live on Mars, or exploiting these opportunities for rich, untapped resources that can be sent back to Earth. But what don't we know about how biomining could be used in space? For me, and as we will see, for the scientists, the biggest question is we just don't know if these bacteria will actually be able to do these processes in space in different gravity conditions. And that brings us to the paper that we will discuss today, Space Station Biomining Experiment, which demonstrates that rare earth element extraction in microgravity and Mars gravity is possible.
So before you move on, there were a couple questions / comments in the chat.
Yep.
So one person said the extraction of these REEs has a very costly socioeconomic and health impacts related to the physical labor involved in mining practices. There are virtually no environmental and occupational health and safety guidelines or regulations. And then someone else had a question. So what kind of damage does the mining do to the Earth's crust, and or does it contribute to the movement of the crust?
Yeah, sorry I missed those, y'all. I was scrolling too fast. But yeah, the damage, the crust isn't damaged per se, but it is the consequences of the things that the miners are doing that is having the most environmental or occupational and health impacts. So the chemicals that they use to crush and concentrate these earth elements out of rocks is really laborious and uses chemicals that are pretty intense. So those things trickle down into groundwater and can concentrate downstream. They can create chemical conditions that are toxic to everything from microbes to humans. They can create conditions that are really acidic. And like Fred said, there aren't really robust environmental regulations that can limit what happens. So if the chemicals that they're using above the mine are trickling down through the soil and the crust into the water table, and then those chemicals get moved downstream through groundwater, they could have impacts that are really far away from where the actual mining is taking place. And that's just really super difficult to regulate or monitor. Oh, and Tina raises a great point about seabed mining. So we've talked about this at the Planet Microbes, where we looked at a paper on hydrothermal vents. But the seafloor is studded with these growths that are concentrated in rare earth elements. And previously, I forget what it's called. I think it's like the law of the sea or something like that, but it protects mining from the seabed. And now with demand increasing for these rare earth elements, there are more and more pushes to start harvesting and sort of trawling the deep sea floor to harvest these rare earth, like manganese nodules and things like that. And we just have no concept of how that will impact these microbial and deep sea life communities that are super slow growing and take thousands of years to establish themselves. So yeah, that's a hotly debated area right now and something to keep an eye on in the news. I think I got everything. Before we move on, are there any other questions about the sort of background before we jump into what they did in this paper? Okie dokie. Well, feel free to put something in the chat and I'll try to keep a look-see. All right, so in this paper, it's pretty simple. It's all about figuring out whether these bacteria that we know are really good at biomining rare earth elements on Earth, but can they do it in space? Are they able to concentrate these rare earth elements at different gravity conditions than we find here on Earth? So what did they do? They wanted to look at 3 different bacteria species. Sphingomonas, bacillus, and cupriovitis. And these are three different bacteria that have varying levels of capabilities to concentrate different metals out of rocks. And they wanted to test three different gravity levels. Microgravity, so basically the level of gravity that you experience on the International Space Station. Mars gravity as a place where humans want to go, and Earth gravity as sort of the control. And they incubated these microbes with basalt rocks. Did anyone catch why they wanted to use basalt and why this was a good experimental medium for them to test? What's the moon made out of? Exactly. Dylan says it's similar to rocks on Mars and the moon. So the moon is not made of cheese. It is made of basalt and similar to Mars. And basalt is a rock that actually has high concentrations relative to other rocks of these rare earth elements. And so after incubating these three different bacteria in cultures with basalt rocks at these three different gravity levels, they quantified the amount of rare earth elements that were leached out of the basalt and then compared that to these known starting concentrations in the basalt rocks that they used. Of course, what is the problem with doing an experiment at zero gravity and Mars gravity? Like, how do you simulate that here on Earth? So the other night I was like, oh, you can use the parabolic flight simulators. So they could have done that. If anyone has seen those on TV, I looked up how much it costs for a ticket, and it's like $5,000 to go onto one of these, go onto an airplane that goes straight up and then goes into free fall and simulates zero gravity for a matter of minutes. The problem with that is it's not enough time for bacteria to grow and for you to be able to test any changes. So really the only way to conduct these experiments is to send them into space. And that is what they did, which is what I think makes this paper super cool. They wrote a proposal to Elon Musk and SpaceX, and they sent this experiment up into space to the International Space Station on the SpaceX Dragon capsule Falcon 9 on July 25th, 2019. And if you looked at the acknowledgements in their paper, they actually thank Elon Musk, which I think is super nifty. A close brush with fame we have here. And this is what their experiment looked like. So they made these really compact incubation chambers where they could put the bacteria and the basalt. And then this is a photo of the Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano actually conducting the experiment on the International Space Station. So here he's putting this cartridge with the bacteria and the basalt and the growth medium into this little machine called a qubit, I think. And does anyone know? So obviously they're floating in zero or microgravity out there on the International Space Station. But how do they simulate Mars gravity and Earth gravity on the spaceship so that they can do all of these experiments at the same time? Does anyone know what this little machine is doing? So Tina says pressure simulator, and that is sort of what I thought as well. And that was partially because I looked at this at the chamber that they designed, and it looked like they might be pressing down to simulate gravity. But Dylan is right in the end. It's a little centrifuge. So they're spinning it around and doing that at different speeds to simulate Mars gravity and Earth gravity. And I think that's probably because pressure can have really specific effects on microbial physiology. And so they wanted to not introduce that as another variable to their experiments. So, yep, they were spinning them around to simulate different gravity levels. And then their results are pretty simple. What they found is that this one bacterium out of the 3 that they tested is a really good miner, really good biominer. So it was able to leach out between 111% to 430% of the rare earth elements from basalt relative to the non-biological controls, which are just the basalt that they incubated without any bacteria. They also saw that there was no difference between the different gravity conditions. So looking at this figure from their paper, you can see all of the experiments that they did on the International Space Station, labeled by ISS, with the 3 different bacteria and the 3 different gravity conditions. And each square plot is a different rare earth element. So cerium and neodymium, lanthanum, and then the rare earth elements whose names I always forget. But these are the abundant ones here at the top. So you can see what they're reporting is the quantity in nanograms that are leached out from the basalt into the growth medium, the liquid in which the bacterium is growing. And so they saw this one particular bacterium, Sphingomonas desiccabilis, or S. desiccabilis, was really good at it. But what they did notice, as you can see here, the difference in the amount leached wasn't significantly different between any of the gravity conditions. So the amount in nanograms that S. desiccabilis leached out was similar between the gravity on the space station, Mars gravity, and Earth gravity, but it was noticeably way more than any of the other bacteria that they tested. And they also found that elements with the highest abundance, for example, neodymium, showed the highest leached concentrations. So the more of the rare earth element that you started with, the more that you're going to get out on the other end. And then sort of the downside of their experiment is that they looked at the percentage of how much was leached out based on how much you started with, and they were getting like 0.01%. So kind of cool that they can still do it, and that this bacterium is relatively unfazed by different gravity conditions, but the amount that they're actually extracting is like almost nothing, like super low. So that's one drawback to their experiment. Any other questions so far? Okie dokie. And even though the overall percentage that they were leaching out was relatively low compared to the overall concentration in the basalt, they still posited that these results were pretty surprising and pretty unique. And part of their reasoning here was that low gravity conditions are known to pretty dramatically change the physiology of bacteria. So this is some results from pioneering some of the first spaceflight microbiology experiments that researchers did with Pseudomonas. So they launched these into space in a different mission, and they looked at their ability to form biofilms. And what they saw was that spaceflight increased biofilm formation by this bug. And you can see that in the gray bars are the organisms that were grown in low gravity. And then you can see this sort of false colored image of what, like a sort of looking into a slide, hamburger style, to see that these biofilms, with the green being bacteria, are totally different between normal gravity and spaceflight gravity, zero gravity. And they have this little schematic model to show how different gravity conditions change the behavior and physiology of these organisms. So there was really no reason to think that the ability of these organisms to leach out rare earth elements wouldn't be changed by growing in zero gravity. So the fact that they can still do it and are relatively unfazed by being on Mars or floating not on a planet at all was pretty impressive. And they're unique in part because no one has ever done this. No one has ever tested this in space before. And then finally, they also listed a number of different additional benefits to bringing bacteria into space. Bacteria can aid soil formation by leaching out and breaking down, other elements and compounds from rocks, so they can break these down, and that will increase the amount of nutrients in the crust. They can also form tighter aggregates that reduce surface dust, and which could be good if you are working in a place like the International Space Station where you don't want dust floating around, or in like a pressurized space in a Mars colony. They also posited that these could be byproducts of microbial metabolism could be used as ways to form critical elements for humans to breathe in life support systems, in Mars enclosures or something like that, fuel cells, and for construction of mineral materials. So basically they were saying that there were lots of other uses to bringing these bacteria into space. And then one thing that they didn't touch on are any downsides to bringing bacteria into space and things that we don't know or can't control for, which we can talk about more in the discussion. So before we break out into groups, does anyone have any thoughts or questions or comments?